time out of his really busy schedule to meet with you, talk about the field of public relations. So let's welcome him with a big hand.
Well, thank you. I'm going to get into the presentation in just a moment. Wasn't exactly sure what I should be talking about because you're the ones taking the courses, and so I was concerned about discussing something that you would be covering in a book or in class. So I have kind of focused on an area that I don't think you will necessarily discuss in class. So we'll get into that in just a moment. But I wanted to get an idea of why you chose mass communications, PR. Anyone want to say why or what you want to do with mass communications? Yeah.
Well, I chose public relations because I like talking to people, and I've always been really good at giving advice, so consulting is something that I'm interested in. And I feel like more so my major chose me.
You'll get a lot of that. You'll be counseling throughout the day. As a matter of fact, before I left, I had a client call. We put out a press release last week, and now he's concerned about what he needs to do to follow up. And so you'll be talking to clients and advising them all the time. Anyone else? What?
I wanted to be in the music industry, but I have no musical talent whatsoever.
So you want to do PR for the music? Okay, exactly. That's a very good point. PR is so wonderfully diverse. So you're not pigeonholed into any one thing. Just from my own experience, moved to New York after I graduated. I graduated back in the day when mass communications was not a major. Maybe it was just becoming a major with some of the bigger universities, but I majored in English at Vandy, like you, because that was just what I was interested in and had no idea what I was going to do with it. But I moved to New York and I got involved in financial communications. Anything, how does Wall Street and PR work together? But you know what? Public companies need to communicate a constructive and positive story to shareholders, and there are financial analysts out there. And if they make wrong assumptions about your company, it can be disastrous. So I have worked on mergers and acquisitions, IPOs, been to the New York Stock Exchange. After I was in New York for 5 years, moved to London. I was in London for 13 years. That took me to Russia. I was in Russia for 9 months. I was in Prague for about 6 months. So the wonderful thing is that PR can take you to a lot of places that you would not normally go to, and it opens a lot of doors and creates a lot of wonderful opportunities. So don't ever think that you're boxed into anything. So, congratulations to you for choosing this particular course of study. Any other comments? Anything that maybe I can try to work into my presentation? Any concerns or questions about the field, the industry?
Well, you just mentioned that you traveled. I just made one of my minors global studies, which I've always wanted to travel. So did you volunteer to travel, or were you just told this is where your career is leading you, you have to go here?
It was incredibly haphazard for me. I actually, when I moved to New York, I started working for an investor relations firm. And I got that job, not because I liked investor relations. I didn't even know that it was a field of career, a career choice. But I had an English major, and I had worked in a law firm part-time while I was at Vanderbilt as a legal assistant, runner. And so kind of with that exposure, I was doing corporate communications for them. That was the area of law that I worked for at the law firm. And so it just kind of was a fit. There was an opening. It just so happened the agency was owned by a London-based firm, company. And it just so happened that I worked for the European client base within that agency. So, but those are things you want to maybe start thinking about as and when you look for positions, whether they're internships or your first job. What are your interests? Someone said the music industry. So, there's a door for you there. If you think, ooh, I'd love to go to Wall Street, there's an opportunity for you there. So regardless of where you kind of see yourself positioned in a career or like in an industry at some point, there's a PR opportunity. And so given that the agency I worked for was London-based and I was working for an international client base, I actually reached out to the parent company in London and said, I would love to transfer. They'd never done that before. So they were very receptive to it. So just think about your interests and where you want to be. And international travel, there's a huge, huge opportunity. You might just want to think about where you need to be. Where are those travel opportunities going to come from? If you go to Los Angeles, the bulk of your travel, you can find those international agencies, but the bulk of your client base is probably going to be more Asian focused. And it's going to take you in that direction just because you're on the West Coast. If your interest is more Europe, then you need to be on the East Coast, like New York. If you think I'm a Latin American person and I want to be in South America, you might want to think about what's in Miami. So that's just from an international perspective. So does that answer your question?
Yes.
Well, and so maybe we can get into that. And if y'all have questions, by all means, yeah.
No, I live in South America, and where I live, there's virtually no PR.
Okay.
It's a new field.
The agency I worked for in New York at that time, it was called D. Rogerson, and it's been bought out by Citygate, which was another London-based firm, and I think it's now Citygate D. Rogerson. But at that time, we had a geographic group, and that's how we were divided up by client focus. We had a Latin American group, and they were bigger than our European group. So there are
probably in Chile and Argentina.
Well, yeah, actually, yeah, they did a lot in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and then traveled to Argentina quite a bit. Yeah, that's right.
Is there any big difference in between, say, the PR techniques here in the United States than from the other countries or other places you visited? Would there
Yes.
be major difference?
Major differences. The principles are all the same, but different markets will have a different emphasis on things. As I've mentioned, my background was more financial PR, which is a little more heavy-handed, it's a little more forthright. I don't shy away from telling a client, you've got a problem here, this is what it is, this is what needs fixing, here's what I would recommend you do. Here in Nashville, it's kind of interesting, and I'm back here because I'm from this area originally. This is where I grew up. I'm back here, and PR professionals tend to be, they want to be softer. It's like, oh, you can't tell the client that because they may take it wrong. It's like, well, but this is the problem. And so there's that issue. New York also is a little more, because of the SEC, and what I was doing in financial communications, it was much more regulated. And so there was a very heavy line between what you can say and what you can say. When I moved to London, that was a lot more blurred. And so PR professionals took a lot more liberties with things that they felt they could say on behalf of the company. Media functions very differently internationally than it does here. And I think here in the United States, we have a very strict ethics code as far as how we approach, or how journalists approach their stories. And I don't want to, it's not yellow journalism, but there's a little more leeway in the way journalists feel they can interpret a story, certainly in Europe. So, it just kind of depends on where you go, but they are going to be very different. The principles are the same. And I just know I did a transaction, and actually it's the largest hostile bid on record. And I represented the client that did the hostile takeover. My client was based in the UK, and we were taking over a company, or we wanted to take over a company in Germany. And that culture, German culture, was very resistant to hostile takeovers. They didn't believe in them as part of a corporate practice. They thought it was very destructive and detrimental to business in general. And so you had politicians weighing in, so there was a public affairs issue that played a part. The journalists in Germany were just very antagonistic toward my client, which was Vodafone. And so I went over to Germany, and my goal was really to spearhead PR, global PR, but doing it from Germany because that was such an important market. And I hired, on behalf of my client, an agency to work with and represent us there in that market. And the first thing I said was, we need to reach out, and we were kind of hampered initially because we had not formally declared that we were going to do a hostile bid. So there was just a lot of speculation. I mean, everybody knew it was coming, but there had been no formal announcement. And I talked to the agency and I said, what you need to do so that we can stop some of this speculation in the market is you need to put me in touch with them. You need to start calling journalists just to let them know that a representative from Vodafone in London is here on the ground to speak with them and answer their questions. And even if we can't comment on that, there's a face to the company that they can turn to. And the first thing they said, and we fought for a couple of weeks on this, you can't do that. You can't do that. I can't go to a journalist in Germany because we don't function that way without a press release. I have to have a press release first. I'm like, you do not have to have a press release. This is the hottest story going. Everyone's writing about it. They're going to want to talk to a representative of the company if that's how I'm going to identify myself. And they would not do it. I picked up the phone and I just started calling journalists. And they were elated to have me. So again, that's just one of those situations where, you know, UK, and in the UK you could have done that, here in the US you could have done that. In Germany they were saying, no, you can't do that. So again, it's a principle. It's like, no, this principle is good, it's sound, it will work, we can do this. And it was hugely successful. They were still writing negatively about my client, but at least we had a voice in that story, and that was important. Anything else at the moment? Well, okay. Well, we'll go ahead and we'll get started. And any questions, feel free to ask. Yep.
I just want to know, how long did it take before you felt like established in your career, that you are fully knowledgeable of how to handle everything?
You know that it takes several years just because there are a plethora of situations out there. And you know, you can't really study them all in a textbook. So again, it goes back to what I was saying, focus on the principles. And with the principles, you have a gut reaction. And so, you know, when I was in Germany, it was Frankfurt where I was based, I'm like, this is going to work. I'm telling you, we can do this. And, you know, they were saying no. So it takes several years. And, you know, when I was doing that, I was several years into my career at that point. Would I have had the authority to have done that, you know, 2 years into my career? Probably not. But yeah, I mean, give yourself time and explore. I mean, you know, if you start off with an agency and you like it, but it's not necessarily exciting, we'll be strategic about it and go to a different environment and explore there. And you're just actually gaining better skills by doing that. Okay. Well, I work for Global Communications, and I would say the bread and butter is really healthcare to a large extent, and then branding. So with me, I'm kind of coming in and I'm picking up some of these things, and I'm actually writing. I'm their senior writer on staff, and hopefully we'll be kind of branching out more into some financial communications, which is my background, although on a project basis, through healthcare and other clients, we have done a lot of mergers and acquisitions, but hopefully we'll be able to expand that to a certain extent. You know, this is stuff that you know, so I'm not going to waste time on this, but these are just some of the things that some of my colleagues have encountered and some of the things that they've worked on. This is the stuff that you're probably studying in class and in your textbooks. Obviously, the writing of press releases, crisis communications, you're going to be doing a lot of that. And you want to because there's a lot of big money in it. Of course, if you're on the corporate side, you're not going to like it because it eats up your budget. But you know, clients are calling all the time, got a problem here, this group, how do we address it? Investor roadshows. So again, you're kind of getting a bit of the diversity here. Obviously, dealing with the media. And you know, I can't emphasize enough the importance